Hi, folks. My name is Emmanuel. Some of you know me as Mystery, and we're welcoming today Mr. Sean O'Connell. He's one of the greatest people in the world. He's a Spider-Man enthusiast. He works for CinemaBlend, and today he's promoting his new book, With Great Power. So, Sean, thank you very much for being with us here. Yeah, that's the book. That's the one. It comes out November 3rd. So be
Yes.
sure to check that out on your nearby store. When I was doing the research for this interview, I was like, I bet Sean has a lot of really cool stories about Spider-Man because I'm a millennial. And the only thing I remember from my childhood is reading Spider-Man comic books and watching Tobey's trilogy.
Mm.
And when the first movie came out, I was 8 years old. And I wanted to know, when did you first encounter Spider-Man?
So I was young, even younger than 8. I was probably closer to around 5, and I grew up in the
Mhm.
1970s, and the
Yeah.
the 1960s animated show was still running
Mhm.
every afternoon, right around the time that I would get home from school. So, but the first thing I did when I got home from school was drop my bag and then run to the television set to watch
Yeah.
episodes of that 1960s animated series. That was extremely influential, and that's why I think that that theme song is so important to me. And just the way that they used the humor in that, like that was my entry point into the character. And I love part of this process and talking to all the different people who are fans of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It's fun to hear when they first got into it, and for so many people it was Tobey's trilogy, right? Like I completely understand that, like, that first movie was so important to him, but like it's there was a time when Marvel was really trying to get other Spider-Man projects up and running, and I tracked all of those. I found those to be fascinating because he's always been my favorite character. I've always really associated with him, and I've always wanted to see him on the big screen. So as a kid, I could never imagine that we would get to a point where we are now, where like there's a movie with 3 generations of Spider-Man, teaming up against a smaller version of the Sinister Six, essentially. And it's so exciting. It's such a good time to be a Spider-Man fan.
I completely agree. I remember when I first heard about Spider-Man No Way Home and what it would mean for not only the movie but for fans. It became a great deal. For months, we would only talk about the movie and what could happen, and knew that all the 3 Spider-Man were going to be in the movie. And it was like a huge thing. And I remember just being in the theater amazed. And my parents don't follow social media, so they didn't even know. And when I saw their faces in excitement watching Andrew, Toby, and Tom, it was just amazing. Just to quote Spidey.
Well, and there's a moment when Andrew's character catches Zendaya, catches
Yeah,
Michelle, essentially. And I
yeah,
was sitting next to my wife, who's a casual fan, but she knows enough to know that, like, his Peter lost, Gwen,
yeah.
lost Emma Stone,
When,
and
yeah.
she broke into tears essentially and said, like, "Oh my God, I can't
Hmm.
believe that he got to, fix his broken heart," kind of thing, by doing that.
Yeah.
It just goes to show, like, how those stories impact us emotionally, so that when moments like that happen, whether you're a diehard fan or you've just kind of watched the movies, you're still so
Hmm.
invested in them, and you just you're so moved by it. And I've always been fascinated by that, and I've always been fascinated about how this character figures out how to connect to all different people around the world on an emotional level.
Yeah, I completely agree. I remember watching Toby's trilogy. What I really liked about his films, it was that it felt like so familiar. And I always consider myself a nerd. And so I could see a lot of myself in Toby's performance. And that was, I think, what connected with a lot of people. And that's really, really great what made his performance on another level. Because
Mm-hmm.
then we got Andrew and we got Tom, but they're different styles.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, their Peters are very different. Did you guys have anything else that you could say, well, this was very present in our time? regarding Spider-Man?
Well, it feels like he was always around. It feels like there was
Yeah.
he was on television because eventually that 1960s show gave way to
Mhm.
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, where he was with Iceman and Firestar, and that
Yeah.
that became a show for a little while. But those
Yeah.
were just a gateway into the comics then, because then I started collecting the comics,
Mm.
and there were, there was Spider-Man seemed like the one character besides. I'm trying to think of another example. I guess the Avengers had multiple books, but like Spider-Man had multiple books running at all different times. The
Mhm.
Amazing Spider-Man,
Yeah.
Web of Spider-Man, Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. He was a predominant character in Marvel Team Up. So there was always a new adventure to go find with him. Now, it's an expensive hobby. It was a very expensive hobby at the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah. It still
but if
is. It still
it
is.
still is. Yeah, of course. It's only gone up from this point. But I always felt like there was something like if you're a fan of that character, there were always so many things that you could go to find new examples of him. And this is long before the movies even came to be. So it was the cartoons and then the gateway into the comic books. And then I just collected like mad, because at that point, then it was like late 80s, early 90s, probably. And so, there's a backlog, an entire catalog of old comics that you can go and pick up. And this was around the time when they were,
Yeah.
not affordable necessarily, but you could get a
Mhm.
pretty good old comic, for $30, $40 or something like that. And now something like that goes for hundreds of dollars. So,
Yeah. Totally true.
it's crazy how much that's gone up.
I think we are in a great moment to speak about something that comes with great power, and that's responsibility. I
Mhm.
think that we're gonna see in your book a lot of that, and I wanted to know, how did you think of writing this book?
Prior to writing this book, I wrote another book. This is my second book.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the first book that I wrote is called Release the Snyder Cut. And it was about
Yeah.
the fans that pushed really hard to get Zack Snyder's Justice
Hmm.
League released. And that book took about a year to write. And it was a really exciting story because in the middle of writing it, Warner Brothers announced that they were going to actually release the cut, which ended up going to HBO Max, and people got a chance to see it. And that felt like, you
Yeah.
know, it was like breaking news, writing about it as it was going into a book.
Hmm.
When I ended that process, what I learned over the course of writing that first book is that if you're going to write a book about anything, you better love the subject, because you're going to live with it, every day for the better part of 2 years, maybe.
Yeah.
You're going to be researching it. You're going to be analyzing it. You're going to be writing it and rewriting it. And so you have to love it. So when I thought, what's a subject matter that I could really dive into? And I'm a comic nerd, so I figured I was going to stay in that universe. I always found it really
Yeah.
funny that my first book was about DC and the Justice League, because I was never really a DC
Yeah.
guy. But I found that story of Justice League
Okay.
and everything that happened with Zack Snyder, I found that to be such a fascinating story that I wanted to tell it. But now I was like, I'm going to go back over to Marvel and figure out something to do. And I was always intrigued by, with Spider-Man, that he's a character who is owned by one studio, but they were successful with him. Then they kind of fumbled the ball a little bit. Then they figured
Yeah.
out how to share him with Marvel, because I still think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is one of the most impressive things that we've seen in our lifetime. So I
Yeah.
wanted to figure out a way to bridge a story that showed how Spider-Man got his start at Sony, but how it eventually transitioned over so that they're sharing him with Marvel. And then
Hmm.
the book gets into
Yeah.
so many other aspects, like the animated Into the Spider-Verse and the fact that it won an Oscar, and it gets into the Venom films and Morbius, and how Sony is trying to build out that side of the universe without Spider-Man. I found all of
Mm.
these stories, once you start to dig into them, they're all really exciting because they're so different than any other character. There's no other superhero character that has that many plates spinning in their universe, and I just figured it would be a good subject to sort of get all together into one book.
As you said, Spider-Man now is this character that's widely known. Like when you see the web, you already know it's Spider-Man. And we have film, we have series, we have comics. There's even a play I got to see, Turn Off the Dark, before it closed, and
Okay.
that was something else.
Right.
Is there another character from the superhero genre that has had a play or something similar, like crossover to theater?
No, not that I can think of, which is another reason why Spider-Man's power, how his attraction is so unique. Because no, I can't think of any other superhero character that's made it onto Broadway in any way, shape, or form, especially with,
Yeah.
Julie Taymor, who's a extremely successful playwright, and then with music by Bono and The Edge from U2. Like
Yes.
that's a high-powered production that's being put together for
Yeah.
Spider-Man. No, there's no other character that comes even close to getting something like that.
Wow. So there we go, folks. You're seeing that Spider-Man has really conquered basically almost every medium possible, and now it's conquering Sean O'Connell's newest book. Sean, tell us more about your creative process. You were saying that took you about a year or more to write this book. What was the creative process for people that are interested in writing a book?
That's a great question. For me, it starts off with building out what I think the table of contents of the book are going to be. Really putting together what the framework is going to be. I know that there are certain stories from Spider-Man's history that I want to tell. Some of the ones that stood out to me in terms of putting this one together is
Mhm.
I think that story. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I'm sure that you are. You're an enormous fan. Do you remember when Andrew Garfield went to Comic-Con and surprised everybody by pulling off his mask and he was in the audience? Do you remember? Have you ever seen that video?
Yeah. See.
Yeah, I wanted to know the behind the scenes of that story. I wanted to know. I know there was a point when Shailene Woodley was cast as Mary
Yeah.
Jane Watson, and then she didn't make it into the films, and I wanted to figure out what happened there.
Hmm.
I knew
Yeah.
that there was a time when Sam Raimi was going to be working on Spider-Man 4, and I wanted to speak with different people who were associated with trying to put that together. And so I got to speak with some of the guys who did
Yeah.
a lot of the storyboards for Spider-Man 4. I talked to different people who worked on the Raimi trilogy, who worked on his costuming, and how they figured out how to just make him look the way that he looks in live action.
Hmm.
So I knew, these are all the stories that I wanted to tell. Now, how do I shape it together into one big story?
Hmm.
And there's no other way to do it besides you really just sort of take it one step at a time. You focus on one story, you
Hmm.
write it out as long as you can, you expand it, you do as many interviews as you can with people that you want to talk to. Sometimes you put it aside, and you think, all right, now I'm going to pursue something else completely. But then another idea will pop up and you'll go back to that story. And then little by little, you just start to see this book take shape. And it's crazy. It honestly is
Yeah.
crazy. I don't think I'll ever get used to the process, but I know that I enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot.
It's really cool to see that in 2022 we're getting another Spider-Man book. Not only that, we're emphasizing about how the Spider-Verse, if we want to say it like that, has expanded. We also have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which now has two sequels announced, and I really loved Spider-Man Into Spider-Verse, not only for its animation, but the story felt like it hit home. And uh, Miles Morales is amazing. We're not gonna take away any credit from Peter Parker, but I feel like Spider-Man just keeps on giving. It's something that it's universal, and that's why a lot of people love this character and all its iterations.
When I can't tell you how many kids now consider Miles Morales to be their Spider-Man.
Hmm.
They've been introduced to this. What I was talking to you about earlier about like how it's always so interesting to find out how certain people are introduced to the character, and for
Yeah.
a complete new generation,
Hmm.
Miles is their version of Spider-Man, you know, and they either know him from Into the Spider-Verse or they were reading some of the comic books that, you know, where he was introduced to the Ultimate comic series, which I think is amazing. Like that's so cool. And one of the aspects that we touch on heavily in the book is how Spider-Man is such a global superhero because he's one of the few where his features are completely covered in a mask. So almost anybody can look at him as a hero and identify, you know, with him essentially because he doesn't show any kind of race or even specific gender. And the way that we've extended out to include characters like Spider Gwen, you know, it's become he's become one of the most universal superheroes for a global community. And I think it's amazing that so many kids are so into Miles now and learn about Peter, you know, through other stories, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and it goes back to the quote Stanley said into Spider-Verse, that is, anyone can wear the mask. I think that quote it gave strength and power to many people, because I remember uh, going on Twitter and seeing a lot of people drawing their versions of Spider-Man, and it was from different parts of the world, and everyone was giving their own take on it. It's completely amazing. So let's go a little bit deeper into the book. What can readers find in this book that probably they're going to be blown away by it?
So I really tried to get some great behind the scenes from people who were part of the process. And so I spoke with a lot of people who worked really closely with Sam Raimi on Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2. I got into some really great costume design stuff about Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus. I broke down with John Dykstra, who's a visual effects artist, his entire process for putting together the subway fight scene from Spider-Man 2. And, you know, just the way that they shot it,
Awesome.
I think is really incredible. I got into all of the reasons why Spider-Man 3 didn't necessarily work, like why Sam wasn't 100% convinced,
Yeah.
but why the studio pushed really hard for him to do it. I got some really great stories from the guys who wrote both Spider-Man Civil War or Captain America Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming, of how they really figured out how to make Tom Holland's Spider-Man different from everything that came before it. Because the one thing that Tobey had going for him is that when he became Spider-Man, there was nobody to compare him to. But it became more and more difficult with each
Yeah.
new Spider-Man. Like Andrew was immediately compared to Tobey,
Yeah.
you know? And then with Tom, it was always like, well, now
Mhm.
there's the MCU, and how are you going to fit into the MCU? And to the point where like people sort of ridicule, you know, Tony Stark for almost being his Uncle Ben in a way. So
Yeah.
I got into the thought that I spoke with all the screenwriters to get into the thought process of like, why did you guys do this? How come we got these things? And so I think that those are really good stories. I mentioned that chapter about Shailene Woodley. I finally got all the information about her being hired and why she had to leave the part and why they left her on the cutting room floor, which I think is going to be really interesting for a lot of people. And then I get into the really early developments of filmmakers who tried to get started with a Spider-Man movie that didn't go anywhere. I interviewed James Cameron, and he talked about the version that he wanted to make, where he thought about maybe doing it with Leonardo DiCaprio before they did Titanic. So I just feel like if you're interested in Spider-Man, or if you're a fan of the Spider-Man movies in any way, shape, or form, there's going to be a couple of stories in this book that you probably haven't heard before that I think are going to really pick your interest and make you want to go back and rewatch all the movies again.
Well, I'm definitely, hooked just hearing about the whole James Cameron DiCaprio thing. I think it's gonna be great. I can't wait to read this book. I know a lot of people are gonna be looking forward to it because Christmas is around. So many people will either buy it as Christmas presents, and that will help you boost sales. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah,
Well, so my wife is
and
actually
so
reading it. She didn't read it while I was writing it, but she was reading it now. And she said to me, she goes,
yeah.
"This is actually like a book that I would buy you for Christmas. Like I think that you would really enjoy this as a Spider-Man fan. And I said, yeah, that's kind of why I wrote it. I wrote it for people who are huge Spider-Man fans who would love these stories. And I think as a fan myself, I hope I put enough stories in that are going to be really entertaining for people.
Can I ask you what is your favorite, let's say, quality of Spider-Man?
Oh, without question, it's the fact that he refuses to quit. That no matter how overmatched he is, that he's always going to find a way to persevere. And in fact, like one of my all-time favorite Spider-Man stories or panels that reflect his, ability to just keep pushing through is from Amazing Spider-Man number 33, the final chapter, where he's buried underneath uh, all of that machinery, and he's got to reach the antidote to get to Aunt May, and figure out a way to just pull up his inner strength and lift this weight off of his shoulders. And so when they paid homage to that in Spider-Man Homecoming, I literally stood up in my chair and I was like, oh my God, are they going to do it? Are they actually going to do it? And then, and then they pull it off. And, because that to me is like that Peter, he has to do the right thing every single time, even though he knows what it's going to cost him, like there's that great element when he goes into the homecoming dance in Homecoming, and he basically just has to say to Liz immediately, I gotta go, because he just knows he can't let Vulture get away. And it's always at this, sacrifice to his happiness, and but he has to do the right thing. And I just think that's a quality that I admire in him more than anything.
Yeah, and it got me thinking too. For example, Turn Off the Dark, the Broadway play, and I'm sorry if spoilers, but basically Peter takes off a night from working, and that's when the whole town goes haywire.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I felt that was really cool because we don't see that in many Spider-Man stories, and it's something that creates like more tension. How is he going to deal with the whole process? There comes the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. I just feel like it creates a lot of weight, and as we saw, I think more on the Tom Holland films, uh, he has more responsibility to deal with than a normal teenager, and we see how it's almost a burden to him, and he's having to deal with also having no parental figure. And so that's
Mhm.
why they bring Tony Stark. Then there's Doctor Strange, and it's something that goes far beyond what's written in the script.
No, I would agree. And I think with Marvel Studios now being able to tell Spider-Man stories, they're able to connect with what makes him uniquely special. And so you get that scene in the Staten Island ferry where he thinks he's doing the right thing, but it's Spider-Man. Things can't go his
Yeah,
way. It's always gonna. And I love that
yeah,
sequence where he zips through and tries to web the ferry together, and he's that close to making it happen. And when the
yeah,
ferry still starts to pull itself apart, he puts himself in the
yeah,
middle of it and grabs both sides and tries to hold it together. Like that's what Spider-Man would do. He'll
yeah,
never stop. He's never gonna stop. And I just think that
yeah.
that's terrific. I think that's terrific.
Yeah, and so talking about non-stop action, what would you say was the hardest part when you were writing with great power?
Just trying to get the number of interviews from people that I really wanted to speak to. And
Yeah,
with this book, and I'm sure that this is the case with every book, you need a couple of
yeah,
people to say yes first, right? Because um, I got to interview very early in the process Avi
yeah,
Arad, who is a producer who is very responsible for Marvel bringing their stories out to Hollywood, and he was responsible for Bryan Singer's X-Men and Blade, and Blade at New Line, and then of course launching Spider-Man. And Avi's been sort of
yeah,
on the ground floor for a lot of these movies. After I got Avi, then a lot of people were like, "Oh, okay, you spoke to Avi. Like this is this is going to be an actual book, because you're trying to convince them what you want to do, but most people are like, oh, I don't want to be part of that. That's okay, because they don't know who you are necessarily. So it's a matter of constantly emailing people and trying to explain what your pitch is, and let them know. Like a lot of times, even in advance, they'll say to like, hey, can you send me all of your questions beforehand? I want to know what you're going to ask me, sort of thing. And then there were people like Matt Tolmack, who's a producer on all the Sam Raimi ones and all the Mark Webb movies. He was integral to just sort of sit down and share stories with me. And then once you get some people on the phone, they'll be like, call me back anytime. If there's anything you run into that you want to know, give me a call. Avi's been great like that. Avi's hopped on the phone a couple of times. And then I've got people like Amy Pascal, who's big at Sony. And I've been able to interview Kevin Feige a number of times over the years, and get his insight into different stuff. So, but getting those first people to say yes is really hard and super important.
Hearing about Kevin Feige, Amy Pascal, Abby, those are people that to us, the fan community, we know who they are. So I was just like, oh my God, this is something, big, because we don't normally hear these people talking on the media, or if they do interviews, it's actually limited, and I think it's going to be something that people are going to love. So what do you expect people learn from this book or cherish from having read this book?
I hope that they learn in the book how important Spider-Man is to so many people. That there are movies and there are movie characters that are, important to certain people. James Bond, or, the Jurassic Park franchise. But Spider-Man's different. Yeah. Like Spider-Man for so many people is like a lifestyle almost, like there are, in reading about him and writing about him, cosplayers, who spend thousands of dollars to recreate suits, so they can feel like him just for a minute. Tours of locations throughout New York where they shot scenes from the different Spider-Man movies. Because one of the things that I emphasize in the book is that he's not Harry Potter, and he's not Luke Skywalker, who's born a Jedi, and he defends New York City, you can go see where, like, he's rooted in our reality in every way, shape, or form. And I think Sam Raimi understood that more than anybody else, because you would get those scenes where, the New Yorkers would stand up to Dr. Octopus on the train and be like, hey, if you're going to get to him, you got to go through me, sort of thing. And I think that the relationship between Spider-Man and his fans is that close. It's almost like this guy is ours, and we're going to go to such great lengths to protect him and to honor him. And I hope that my passion for him and my love for him as a character shines through in the book.
Awesome. I really agree on that about Sam Raimi. I even would go even further and say that I love the way he portrayed the villains. Even if Eddie Brock wasn't his greatest showing, but as far as going as Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, Willem Dafoe, he's just masterful. He did the best thing with that character. It's something else. I feel like Sam Raimi really did an amazing job with Spider-Man, and you as well. I mean, I'm just here excited to read the book, and I know a lot of people are going to be excited to get the book and read it and tell you all about it. What's next after publishing with great power?
Well, I've already signed a contract to do my third book, which is crazy.
Awesome. Congrats.
Yes, I'm doing a third one. And this one is going to be about Bruce Willis, the actor. Wow. After he announced his retirement, I thought it would be a really good opportunity to sort of look at his film career and talk about why him retiring is important to the industry. The impact that he's had on films, and the film industry. And when you step back and look at his films, he gets lumped into a category with like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, but he tries things that they never could or did. You know, his comedies, if he does something like, you know, Death Becomes Her or The Whole Nine Yards or something, the way that he did sci-fi with 12 Monkeys and The Fifth Element and Armageddon, and then like his big movies like Pulp Fiction and The Sixth Sense, like I want to take all of those movies and kind of break them down and talk about why they're important, and then just put his whole career into perspective now that he's announced his retirement.
You know, regarding Bruce Willis, he's such a great actor. I love his episodes on Friends, the movie Cop Out. I love the whole debate about is Die Hard a Christmas movie or not. And also, if you're a fan of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, he was constantly mentioned on the show. I feel like he's one of the last movie stars we still have in Hollywood. Congrats on your next book about Bruce Willis. I know that a lot of people are going to love that.
Very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Those are my Twitter handles.
At CinemaBlend and with Great Power Book.
And then the book is available all different places where you order books. It's at Barnes and Noble, it's at Amazon, it's at Target and Walgreens and all those different places where you pick up new books. So please feel free to grab a copy and let me know what you think.
Thank you once again, Sean, for time. I really loved this interview. I don't get many moments to geek out, so this was definitely one of them.
Thank you so much for having me on. All I like to do is geek out, so whenever I can find someone who is as passionate as I am, as you clearly are, we're always going to have a good time. And let's continue to enjoy our love of Spider-Man together, and hopefully talk again sometime soon in the near future, my friend.
Of course. Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.